Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a story that's equal parts mystery and heartbreak. Imagine the smoggy streets of post-war Germany, people struggling, rebuilding, but with a simmering tension that could explode at any moment. Among them, there was one woman who shone brighter than the rest, a woman whose life would soon turn tragic in a way that still haunts us today. You probably won't survive this one, not in the sense of danger, but in the emotional toll it'll take on you. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where all of you are joining from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Born in 1933, Rosemarie Nitribitt was a woman caught in the swirling currents of a city rebuilding itself. Though that rebirth was never as simple as it seemed. By the time she was a teenager, Germany was emerging from the wreckage of World War II, a country divided both physically and morally. But Rosemarie wasn't born into hardship. Like many of her contemporaries, her early years were marked by quiet, careful ambition. She knew what she wanted, even if she didn't fully understand the costs. In her early 20s, Rosemarie entered the world of high society, the dazzling nightlife of Frankfurt's wealthy elite, where money flowed like champagne, and the rich played dangerous games. She had the looks, the charm, and the ability to captivate the men who filled these circles. But there's a twist in her story, and one that would soon propel her into a situation beyond her control, her connection to a shadowy, elusive figure, one who was about to change the course of her life forever. Historians still argue whether her rise to fame was truly accidental or whether she was always meant for something more sinister. One thing was for certain, though, her beauty wasn't the only thing that made her unforgettable. Rosemarie was a woman who knew how to get what she wanted. In a way, she was both a victim and a survivor. The tragic ending. Well, we'll get to that soon enough. Imagine walking through a grand, smoke-filled room, the air thick with perfume and tension. This was Rosemarie Nitribitt's world high society in the late 1950s, where the walls were lined with secrets, and the men were rich enough to make those secrets deadly. Rosemarie wasn't just another pretty face in the crowd. She was a sensation, a beacon for the powerful and the influential. But it wasn't just her beauty that drew them in. It was something darker, more elusive, perhaps a quiet desperation in her eyes, a knowing smile that promised more than mere flirtation. You probably wouldn't survive this scene because this wasn't a world for the faint-hearted. But I digress. Before we move on, take a moment to like the video if you haven't already, and if you're really into this deep dive, subscribe. Let me know where you're listening from. I love connecting with all of you. Now dim the lights, maybe grab a blanket to curl up in, and let's get back into tonight's journey. In these glamorous circles, Rosemarie's rise to fame was swift. It wasn't just about being a beautiful young woman in an era where style was everything. It was about using her beauty and charm to her advantage. You see, in these high society worlds, many women were merely accessories to the men who ran things. But Rosemarie was different. She wasn't content to be someone's trophy. She knew how to move in the shadows, gathering influence, slowly carving out a place for herself among the wealthy, the powerful, and inevitably the corrupt. Historians still debate whether she was truly in control of her destiny, or if the allure of wealth and luxury blinded her to the dangers of the world she was entering. Was she just another ambitious young woman caught in the web of male-dominated power games? Or was there something more calculating in her pursuit of fame? The men who sought her company were not just businessmen, but the kind who played with power, spying, influencing, and manipulating behind closed doors. One such man was Hans, a wealthy industrialist whose name would become permanently linked with hers in the tragic events that would unfold. Their relationship, both professional and personal, would quickly spiral into a dangerous, complex tangle that Rosemarie would struggle to escape. This wasn't a romance, it was a game, and Rosemarie was playing for keeps. Now let's take a moment to focus on something that always seems to slip through the cracks when we talk about high society, the world of betrayal. It's a world of shiny facades where everyone is smiling, but underneath the knives are always out. And for Rosemarie, betrayal was not just something that happened in the background. It was a constant shadow creeping up when she least expected it. You probably won't survive this part either. Betrayal tends to stick with you, doesn't it? It lingers in the mind long after you've heard it. But before we dive deeper, hit that like button if you're still with me and subscribe if you haven't already. And of course, let me know where you're tuning in from. I always love seeing how far this little journey spreads. Now dim the lights a little more, make yourself comfortable, and let's get back to it. Rosemarie's life wasn't a simple tale of ambition and beauty. Beneath the glimmering surface of luxury there were cracks, deep ones that threatened to break everything apart. She wasn't just betrayed by the men who came and went from her life. No, this was worse. She was betrayed by the very system she'd tried to climb into. The circles she'd worked so hard to be a part of were filled with alliances that shifted like quicksand. A deal made one day could be forgotten the next, and loyalty was a currency that had little value in this world of endless transactions. Historians still argue whether Rosemarie ever truly understood the web she was entangled in. Was she aware of the dangers of her choices, or was she blinded by the excitement of it all? She had always been careful with her words, calculating with the men she surrounded herself with. But even she couldn't avoid the inevitable. There would come a time when her charm wasn't enough to protect her from the betrayal that was about to hit. It all started with Hans. What was once a seemingly promising relationship, a partnership built on mutual need, soon turned into something much darker. His lies piled on top of each other like a tower that couldn't stand for much longer. The people who had once treated Rosemarie like an asset began to treat her like a pawn to be discarded when she was no longer useful. But even as her life unraveled, she kept playing the game, pretending to be in control. But the truth is, no one is ever really in control in a game like this. The question is, did she really know the stakes, or was she too entranced by the glitz and glamour to see the danger coming? Now let's step into the heart of the story. The dangerous, glittering world of high society. Picture yourself surrounded by silk diamonds and glasses clinking together in the soft, seductive glow of candlelight. But don't be fooled by the elegance. Beneath this surface lies a world where secrets are currency and power is the game everyone plays. A world where one wrong move could cost you everything. You probably won't survive this scene either, not physically, but in terms of your trust in people. But before we dive back in, be sure to like the video if you're following along and consider subscribing. You don't want to miss what's coming next. And don't forget to let me know where you're tuning in from. Now dim those lights just a little more, get comfy, and let's ease into this world of wealth and peril. Frankfurt's high society wasn't like the world of ordinary people. It wasn't just a place of wealth, it was a dangerous playground where men made decisions that affected lives without even thinking twice. The lavish parties, the exclusive gatherings, the quiet deals happening behind closed doors, all of this was the backdrop of Rosemarie's rise to prominence. She knew how to navigate this world, but it wasn't without its dangers. The men who frequented these elite circles weren't just businessmen, they were power players, people who had influence far beyond the city. And Rosemarie, with her beauty and quick wit, became a highly sought-after companion. But she was never just a passive participant. No, she was always a player in her own right, always calculating, always thinking 3 steps ahead. Historians still debate whether Rosemarie was truly an equal partner in the games played by the men around her, or whether she was merely a tool they used for their own gains. Some say she was a victim of the system trapped by forces beyond her control, while others argue she was just as guilty of manipulation as the men who used her. But even in this glittering world of privilege, Rosemarie wasn't immune to the dangers that lurked in the shadows. There were whispers of her involvement with powerful figures and whose reputations were just as murky as their dealings. And as Rosemarie's connections grew deeper, so did the web of lies and deceit that surrounded her. Soon she wasn't just a mistress or a lover, she was a part of the game, and the game was getting more dangerous by the day. In this world, no one could be trusted. Everyone was playing for power, and no one cared who got hurt in the process. Now imagine the quiet before the storm. It's that eerie moment when everything seems calm, but you know something's about to break. Rosemarie, once at the center of glittering parties and whispered deals, found herself drawn into a situation she couldn't control. And then, just like that, the unthinkable happened. She vanished. You probably won't survive the mystery of this disappearance. It has that haunting quality that sticks with you. But before we unravel this chilling moment, don't forget to like the video if you're following along and subscribe if you want to hear the rest of this twisted tale. And as always, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love hearing from all of you. Now dim the lights, feel the tension, and let's delve into the mystery of Rosemarie's disappearance. Rosemarie's disappearance was as sudden as it was mysterious. One day she was the talk of the town, the center of attention in every room she entered. The next, she was gone, leaving nothing behind but a trail of unanswered questions and a city in shock. Her disappearance didn't just shock her friends and lovers, it sent ripples through the entire community. People started talking, speculating, and imagining the worst. Historians still argue whether this was an act of escape or whether something more sinister was at play. Was Rosemarie trying to flee the life she had built for herself, or was there someone else involved, someone who didn't want her to leave? As the days passed and Rosemarie remained absent, the media frenzy began. Journalists, photographers, and the curious public all clamored for answers. But the truth was, no one had a clear explanation. And as the investigation began, it became increasingly clear that this wasn't just a simple case of a woman running away. It was much more complicated. The theories began to mount. Was she in hiding, running from the dangers she had found herself surrounded by? Or had someone silenced her, making sure she wouldn't expose the secrets she knew? The investigation went in circles, and the case quickly turned cold with no clear answers. People started to wonder, was the city hiding something? Or was Rosemarie just another casualty of a world that ate its own? One thing was certain. The shadows of her disappearance would only grow darker as the story unfolded. Imagine the chilling moment when the silence is finally broken the day Rosemarie's body was found. The mystery that had been building for weeks came to a tragic and unsettling climax. The discovery sent shockwaves through the city, turning a haunting disappearance into a grim reality. You probably won't survive the shock of it. It's that cold, that jarring. But before we dive deeper, hit that like button if you're still with me, and don't forget to subscribe for the rest of this gripping tale. I'm curious, where are you listening from? Share your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing the diverse places everyone tunes in from. Now dim those lights once more, and let's explore the discovery that would change everything. The moment Rosemarie's body was discovered was nothing short of haunting. It wasn't some dramatic scene straight out of a movie. It was cold, clinical, and unsettling in its simplicity. She was found in her own apartment alone, her life taken in a way that left more questions than answers. The police had no clues, and the evidence was scant. Whoever had done this had been careful, making sure to cover their tracks. Historians still debate the nature of the crime. Was it a carefully planned murder, or did something else happen, a botched confrontation? An argument that went too far. Was she targeted because of what she knew? Or was this just the final act in a life full of bad decisions? The authorities scrambled to find answers. They dusted for fingerprints, scoured the apartment for any sign of the killer, but found little. The only thing they could confirm was that Rosemarie had been dead for several days before her body was discovered. It was a case that seemed too perfect, too clean, a mystery wrapped in layers of uncertainty. As the investigation continued, the case quickly gained media attention, and the public's curiosity grew. Who would want to kill a woman like Rosemarie? What secrets had she been hiding, and who stood to gain from her death? In the days and weeks that followed, more pieces of the puzzle started to emerge, but they only deepened the mystery. Those who knew Rosemarie began to speak up, but each story seemed to contradict the next. This wasn't just a case of murder. This was a tangled web of lies, deceit, and hidden truths that had yet to be unraveled. Now the city was in a frenzy. Everyone had their theories, but no one had the truth. Rosemarie Nitribitt's name was on everyone's lips. What had happened to her? Why had she been killed, and who had done it? The media, always hungry for a sensational story, pounced on the case. Soon Rosemarie's life, her death, and her tangled relationships were laid bare for the world to see. You probably won't survive the media circus that followed, because nothing is more exhausting than watching a tragic story get twisted and sensationalized for entertainment. But before we get lost in the chaos, hit that like button if you're still following along, and consider subscribing for more gripping narratives. And of course, share where you're tuning in from. I always love seeing the diverse places this story reaches. Now dim the lights, and let's dive into how the public reacted to the news of her death, and the way the media made a spectacle of her life. The discovery of Rosemarie's body sparked an explosion of media coverage. Journalists camped out outside her apartment, searching for any shred of detail that would give them the edge in the story. Photographers snapped pictures of anything remotely related to her life, the people who were seen with her, the places she had visited, the men who had been a part of her world. The public ate it up, desperate for answers to a mystery that seemed to beg for a deeper understanding. But what they got wasn't the truth. It was a media spectacle, one that painted Rosemarie as a tragic, almost mythical figure. Historians still argue whether the media circus surrounding her death was a reflection of society's obsession with scandal, or if it was an attempt to make sense of a case that didn't have a clear resolution. Was the media to blame for the way Rosemarie's life was distorted after her death? Or was she always going to be an enigma, someone destined to be remembered for the mystery that shrouded her? As the case continued, the media began to paint a portrait of Rosemarie as a victim of a cruel and unforgiving world. They sensationalized her relationships, speculated about her wealth and connections, and turned her death into something far larger than the sum of its tragic parts. This wasn't just the story of a woman's untimely end. It became a moral tale, an example of the dangers of ambition, beauty, and power. But the media's portrayal of Rosemarie wasn't just about sensationalism. It also overshadowed the truth. The police investigation seemed to stall as the noise of public speculation grew louder. No one was truly focusing on the facts anymore. Instead, the mystery became a piece of entertainment consumed by the public and the press alike. And yet, behind all of this, there remained the real question: who had killed Rosemarie, and why? By now, you might have figured it out. The investigation into Rosemarie's death was anything but straightforward. The authorities had their hands full, not just with the complexity of the case, but with the overwhelming pressure from the media and public. Every lead seemed to hit a dead end, every suspect just as elusive as the next. And yet, despite the seeming chaos, the investigation was the key to uncovering the truth. It was just a matter of time or so, it seemed. You probably won't survive the frustration of watching a case like this drag on. It's maddening when the pieces don't fall into place. But before we get lost in the details, don't forget to hit like if you're still with me, and subscribe if you want more stories like this one. Drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always fun to see where everyone is joining from. Now dim the lights, take a deep breath, and let's look into the early stages of the investigation and the strange path it began to take. The first few weeks after Rosemarie's death were a blur of police interviews, forensic reports, and dead ends. Her apartment had been carefully examined, but there was nothing conclusive. No weapon, no obvious signs of a struggle. Everything seemed too neat, too controlled, as if someone had deliberately staged the scene to confuse the investigators. The police were baffled. This wasn't the work of a random killer, and it certainly wasn't a crime of passion. Whoever had done this had planned it meticulously. But the question was why. Historians still argue whether the police were simply too overwhelmed by the case's complexity, or whether they were intentionally led down a series of false leads. Was the investigation truly stalling, or was there something more deliberate at play, something that kept the truth just out of reach? As the days turned into weeks, the list of potential suspects grew, though no one seemed to have a clear motive. There were men who had been involved with Rosemarie, wealthy men who had the means to disappear without a trace. There were businessmen, politicians, even the occasional police officer, all with varying degrees of connection to her. But each time the investigators thought they were closing in on someone, the evidence seemed to slip through their fingers. One thing was clear: Rosemarie had been more than just a beautiful woman caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. She had been someone who had known too much. And the deeper the investigation went, the more it seemed that the people who had been closest to her might have been hiding something far darker than anyone could have imagined. It wasn't just a murder, it was a cover-up. And the deeper they dug, the more dangerous the truth became. Now let's take a closer look at Rosemarie's life. A life that was much more than the headlines suggested. Beneath the surface of a glamorous existence filled with dinners, parties, and expensive clothes, Rosemarie had relationships that were as complex as they were damaging. She was not just the subject of gossip. She was a woman navigating a web of deception, her role as a mistress tied to some of the most powerful men in Germany. You probably won't survive the tangled mess of emotions here, because when you start peeling back the layers, things get more complicated by the minute. But before we dive deeper, make sure to like the video if you're still hooked on this mystery and subscribe if you want to hear the rest. Don't forget to share your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where everyone's tuning in from. Now dim those lights a little more, get comfortable, and let's explore the complexities of Rosemarie's relationships. As the investigation unfolded, Rosemarie's role as a mistress became a central focus. She wasn't just a passive participant in the lives of powerful men, she was actively involved in the manipulation and games that defined the elite circles she moved in. Her relationships with these men weren't just about love or lust, they were about power, influence, and control. Historians still argue over how much agency Rosemarie really had in these relationships. Was she simply a pawn caught in a game she couldn't escape? Or was she an active player using her position to manipulate those around her? Some say she was a woman trying to survive in a world that was stacked against her, while others believe she was always looking for a way to climb higher, no matter the cost. Her relationship with Hans was particularly complicated. He wasn't just another wealthy man in her life. He was someone who offered her both love and security, but also a way into the world of the powerful. Yet as their relationship deepened, so did the tensions. Hans wasn't the only one vying for Rosemarie's attention, and as her connections grew, so did the risks. There were whispers that Rosemarie knew more than she let on, that she had information that could bring down some of the most influential figures in the country. This is where things took a darker turn. When the stakes are high, people do dangerous things to protect their secrets. And for Rosemarie, the price of keeping those secrets may have been her life. As the investigation deepened, it became clear that Rosemarie had been much more than just a mistress. She had been a key player in a world that was both intoxicating and deadly, a woman who had navigated its dangerous waters with skill and caution. But in the end, those same skills may have led her to a place she could never escape. Now we turn to the crime scene itself, a place that, while seemingly ordinary, held the clues to a much darker story. The apartment where Rosemarie was found became an eerie symbol of her tragic end. Everything about it, from the way it was left to the silence that hung in the air, spoke volumes. It was as if the very walls were hiding the secrets that had led to her death. You probably won't survive the quiet intensity of the crime scene it has, that haunting, eerie stillness that makes your heart race. But before we continue down this chilling path, Make sure to hit like if you're still captivated by this mystery, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives like this one. As always, share your location and local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where you're joining us from. Now dim those lights a little more, and let's explore the scene of the crime, where every detail seemed to tell a story of its own. When the police arrived at Rosemarie's apartment, they were greeted by a scene that felt almost too composed to be real. There was no obvious sign of a struggle, no sign that Rosemarie had fought back. Her body was found lying in a quiet, almost peaceful manner, yet everything about the scene suggested that something far more sinister had occurred. It was as if someone had gone to great lengths to stage the scene to make it look like something it wasn't. Historians still argue about the implications of the crime scene. Was this a carefully executed murder by someone who knew exactly what they were doing, or was it the result of a passionate outburst that was then covered up? The lack of violence suggested the latter. It wasn't a crime of rage, but something much more calculated. The absence of evidence raised even more questions. There were no fingerprints, no signs of forced entry. Nothing seemed out of place except for the unmistakable stillness that hung in the air. It was as if someone had gone to great lengths to make sure the apartment stayed, just as it was hiding any clues that might lead to the truth. And then there were the little things, details that didn't seem to fit. Rosemarie's phone was missing, but there were no signs of a break-in. Her belongings were undisturbed, yet the door to her apartment had been locked from the inside. Everything seemed too perfect, too controlled. It was as if the killer had known exactly how to erase their presence, leaving nothing behind but questions. As the investigation continued, these small details became even more significant. The crime scene was a puzzle that the police couldn't seem to put together. Whoever had done this had planned every move carefully, making sure to leave as little trace as possible. It was as though the killer had known that their secrets would need to stay hidden no matter the cost. And with each passing day, the mystery deepened. As the investigation trudged forward, the mystery only deepened. There was something more to the case than just the immediate clues or the lack of them. It wasn't just about solving the crime. It was about understanding the hidden forces that had driven this tragedy, the things that no one was willing to acknowledge. The lost clues, the overlooked details, they weren't just random elements in a puzzle. They were pieces of a much darker narrative. You probably won't survive the frustration of knowing there's a deeper truth hidden just out of reach. But before we go any further, make sure to hit like if you're still following the mystery and subscribe to stay in the loop. I'm always curious, where are you all listening from? Drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see the diversity of where this story travels. Now dim the lights just a little more, get comfortable, and let's uncover the lost clues that could have changed everything. The investigation was far from straightforward. With each passing day, the police uncovered more inconsistencies, more elements that didn't quite add up. The evidence seemed to be slipping through their fingers, leaving them with more questions than answers. And the deeper they dug, the more it seemed like someone or something was deliberately keeping them from the truth. Historians still debate whether the lost clues were simply the result of incompetence or if they were deliberately hidden by those who knew exactly what had happened to Rosemarie. Could it be that someone had been working behind the scenes, making sure the investigation stalled at every turn? Some believe that powerful figures were involved, men whose lives could be ruined by the truth, and who would go to any lengths to make sure their involvement remained hidden. One of the biggest pieces of the puzzle that was initially overlooked was Rosemarie's personal connections. Her relationships, particularly with the men who had been closest to her, were more than just casual affairs. They were a web of influence, manipulation, and secrets. As the police began to question those around her, it became clear that the people who had been closest to her were all too willing to cover their tracks. One of the more troubling aspects of the investigation was the missing phone. The police were able to trace her movements up until the night she was killed, but once she entered her apartment, everything went dark. Rosemarie's phone was never found, and it was believed that whoever had killed her had taken it to erase any potential evidence of their connection to the crime. But there was more to it than that. Whoever had been involved in her death knew exactly what they were doing, and they made sure to cover their tracks in every possible way. The lost clues were more than just items of evidence. They were symbols of a larger, more insidious cover-up. They represented the lengths to which those in power would go to protect their secrets, and the price that Rosemarie had paid for getting too close to those secrets. As the investigation plodded along, the walls seemed to close in on everyone involved. The deeper the police dug into the lives of Rosemarie's acquaintances, the more tangled the web of lies became. The people she had been closest to, the men she had trusted, the powerful figures she had been involved with, began to emerge as key suspects, their lives filled with contradictions and motives that couldn't be ignored. The question was no longer just about who had killed her, but who stood to gain the most from her death. You probably won't survive the tension of this section. It's hard to imagine a more stressful web of betrayal than this. But before we get lost in the labyrinth of deceit, be sure to hit that like button if you're still with me, and consider subscribing if you want to hear more of this story unfold. Don't forget to share where you're tuning in from. Your local time and location always intrigue me. Now dim the lights and settle in as we explore how the web of lies began to unravel, revealing the players who might have had more to do with Rosemarie's death than anyone could have imagined. It was becoming clear that Rosemarie's death wasn't a random act of violence. It was a carefully orchestrated crime, one that had been set into motion long before that fateful night. As the police continued to investigate, it became apparent that many of the people closest to her had something to hide, and their secrets ran deeper than anyone could have guessed. Historians still argue whether the police had enough information early on to solve the case, or if the true depth of the conspiracy had been too well hidden. But one thing was certain: Rosemarie had been far more than just a mistress or a casualty of a love triangle. She had been entangled in something far more dangerous, a game of power that was played by some of the most influential figures in Germany. The key to the case lay in understanding the relationships that Rosemarie had cultivated with these powerful men. Some of them had long-standing ties to the political and business elite. But there was one man in particular who seemed to be at the center of it all, Hans. His connections were deep, spanning across business, politics, and even law enforcement. As Rosemarie's lover, Hans had access to the most private corners of her life, and he was one of the few who had known the full extent of her involvement with powerful figures. But Hans wasn't the only one with a stake in her life. One of the more surprising revelations was the role of some of the other men in her life who had motives that weren't immediately clear. These were men who had nothing to gain by her death, or so it seemed on the surface. Yet as the police dug deeper, it became clear that many of them had something to lose, something they were desperate to keep hidden. As the web of lies began to unravel, it became apparent that no one was entirely innocent in Rosemarie's life. And the truth about what had happened to her was far more complicated than anyone had imagined. Who killed Rosemarie? The question was still on everyone's mind, and with every passing day, the answers seemed to grow further out of reach. By now, the theories surrounding Rosemarie's death had reached fever pitch. The media, which had once sensationalized her life, now turned its focus on unraveling the conspiracy behind her murder. The public was no longer just interested in her tragic end, they were fixated on the hidden truth. Theories about who might have been responsible were everywhere, but no one had a definitive answer. As the investigation neared its conclusion, one question remained. Was Rosemarie's death truly the result of a lover's quarrel? Or was there something more sinister at play? You probably won't survive the tangled mess of theories here. It's the kind of confusion that makes you want to scream for clarity. But before we dive back into the chaos, don't forget to hit like if you're still with me, and subscribe if you want to hear more twists and turns in this story. And of course, let me know where you're tuning in from. Share your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing the global reach of this story. Now dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's explore the dark theories and conspiracies that clouded the investigation into Rosemarie's death. As the investigation continued to unfold, the theories surrounding Rosemarie's death became more elaborate. Some believed it was a lover's betrayal, a crime of passion committed by one of her many suitors. Others suspected that Rosemarie had uncovered something dangerous, perhaps even illegal, and had paid the ultimate price for it. Some even speculated that her death was part of a larger political conspiracy tied to the corrupt business deals and power struggles that had defined the circles she moved in. Historians still argue over the validity of these theories. Was Rosemarie truly a victim of a personal vendetta, or was her death a strategic maneuver in a much larger game? The truth is, we may never fully know. But the theories surrounding her death reflect the kind of world she lived in, a world where secrets were worth killing for, and trust was a commodity that few could afford. The media's role in this was undeniable. As soon as her body was found, the media began to create their own narrative, one that both intrigued and manipulated the public. Was it a tragic love story gone wrong? Or was it something far darker? A story of manipulation, greed, and the dangerous undercurrents of high society. In the end, the case of Rosemarie Nitribitt was a puzzle that no one could solve. It wasn't just a question of who had killed her. It was about the system that allowed her death to happen in the first place. The tangled web of relationships, deceit, and corruption was too complicated to unravel in any one investigation. The authorities were left with more questions than answers, and Rosemarie's life became a symbol of the dangers that lurked beneath the surface of wealth and power. And yet, even as the investigation wound down, the mystery of her death lingered. The truth may have been elusive, but it was clear that Rosemarie's life and her tragic end would continue to haunt the public imagination for years to come. As the years passed, the theories surrounding Rosemarie Nitribitt's death continued to swirl, but the case remained unsolved. The investigation might have slowed, but the questions lingered in the minds of those who had followed her story from the beginning. Some believed the truth had been buried by those with enough power to make it disappear, while others wondered if Rosemarie had truly known too much and had paid the price for it. You probably won't survive the lingering uncertainty of this case. It's the kind of mystery that gets under your skin, never quite leaving you. But before we dive into the final theories and reflections on her legacy, make sure to hit that like button if you're still with me, and subscribe for more deep dives into history's most intriguing stories. And of course, share your location and local time in the comments. It's always a treat to see where everyone is tuning in from. Now dim the lights, settle back, and let's explore the final theories and lingering questions that have kept Rosemarie's case alive in the public's consciousness. As time went on, the once high-profile case of Rosemarie Nitribitt became something of a legend, a dark and tragic story that people continued to discuss, speculate about, and revisit. Despite all the theories, the media frenzy, and the investigation that never truly found its mark, one thing was certain. Rosemarie's legacy lived on, not just as a victim, but as a symbol of the danger that came with living in the shadows of power. Historians still debate the true circumstances of her death. Was she truly a pawn in a larger game, manipulated by the powerful men around her, or was she an active player in a world of corruption and deceit? Some even speculate that she may have been murdered to silence her from revealing secrets that could have brought down powerful figures. Whatever the truth was, it's clear that Rosemarie's death wasn't just the end of a life, it was the end of an era, one where the hidden lives of the wealthy and influential were for a time exposed for all to see. But Rosemarie's story didn't just end in tragedy. Her case remains a cautionary tale, a reminder of the danger that lurks when power, greed, and betrayal collide. It's a story that continues to resonate, and as much as people may want to forget her name, is still whispered in the corridors of history. The theories that followed her death, the political conspiracies, the whispers of hidden relationships, and the idea that she knew too much, have kept her story alive. Even today, the mystery of Rosemarie Nitribitt's death is a part of Germany's dark history, a chapter that never truly closes. And perhaps that's exactly how she would want to be remembered, not as a tragic victim, but as a woman whose life and death continue to echo in the shadows of the powerful. And now, here we are at the end of the road. But in a story like Rosemarie Nitribitt's, there's never truly an end, is there? The questions remain lingering like the last whispers of a forgotten dream. The truth of her death may never be fully known, and perhaps that's what makes her story so haunting. She was more than just a victim. She was a symbol of the complexities and dangers of ambition, power, and betrayal. Her life was a game, and it's a game that ended with more questions than answers. You probably won't survive the uncertainty of it all. It's the kind of conclusion that leaves a bitter taste, a feeling of being incomplete. But before we close the final chapter of this tale, don't forget to hit like if you're still with me, and subscribe for more stories that dig into the mysteries of history. And as always, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone is tuning in from. Now dim the lights all the way, take a deep breath, and let's wind down, reflecting on what we've learned from Rosemarie's story. The tragic tale of Rosemarie Nitribitt will forever be marked by uncertainty. She was a woman who lived on the edge of society, playing a dangerous game with the men who held the strings of power. But in the end, she became more than just a piece in their game. She became a symbol of the dangers of living in the shadows. Her death was a tragedy, but it also marked the end of an era, one where the public's fascination with the lives of the rich and powerful intersected with the dark realities of those lives. Historians may never agree on the full truth of Rosemarie's death, but perhaps that's the point. The mystery, the unanswered questions, they have kept her story alive long after the investigation stalled. And in that sense, Rosemarie's legacy endures. She is not just a tragic figure, but a reminder of the hidden forces that shape our world, the things that we may never see but feel in the deepest corners of our souls. As we close the book on her story tonight, remember that not every mystery is meant to be solved. Some stories are meant to linger, to haunt us, to leave us questioning long after the final page is turned. Rosemarie Nitribitt's life and death are among those stories forever incomplete, forever elusive. End of script. Sweet dreams.